Something happened in the Persian Gulf overnight that no amount of Iranian state media denial can take back, no amount of official silence can hide it, and nothing earlier in this conflict fully prepared the world for it. A guided missile destroyer turned into the wind, opened its vertical launch cells, and started firing. Not one Tomahawk, not a small handful, 49 of them, one after another, curving across the night sky toward radar sites, communication hubs, air defense batteries, and IRGC leadership headquarters spread across the whole country of Iran, not just the coast, not just the strait, but deep inside Iran. Kharg, southeast of Tehran, Bandabas, Kashmand. The whole map of Iranian military infrastructure lit up in one night from precision weapons that do not miss and do not negotiate. And then the announcement came, the one that changes everything, the one the Iranian leadership has feared since this conflict began, and the one mainstream coverage has not yet fully understood for what it means to the regime's survival. Not just strikes on Kharg Island, but ownership of it, control of it. The terminal that handles 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, the financial heart of the Islamic Republic, the system through which $500 million flows into the mullah's accounts every single day, being taken by the United States of America and placed under American control permanently, not temporarily, not as a bargaining chip, but as a strategic acquisition. When you understand what Kharg Island really is, you understand why that announcement is not just a military escalation. It is a declaration of the endgame. And the endgame has a shape now that it did not have before this night. But let's go all the way back, because to understand how one night of Tomahawk launches and a presidential Truth Social post changed the strategic structure of this whole conflict, you need to understand the chain of events that made it unavoidable. And why the Iranian regime's inability to come to the negotiating table with anything that looks like a clear and acceptable position is not a failure of diplomacy. It is the predictable result of a command structure that has been using this playbook for 47 years and does not know how to use any other one. The trigger for this specific escalation was an Iranian drone striking a United States Army AH-64 Apache helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz. The Apache went down. Both crew members were pulled from the water, rescued not by a normal naval vessel, but by an autonomous sea drone developed by an Austin-based company, which deployed to the crash site and pulled the aviators out while they were floating in the Persian Gulf. Both crew members survived and recovered without injury. The Shahad drone that hit the Apache apparently did not detonate on impact, and that is the only reason those two pilots are alive instead of dead at the bottom of the strait. One failure in an Iranian explosive mechanism is the difference between a dramatic incident and a national tragedy for the American families of those aviators. One detonation failure. Washington called it what it was, a brutal attack on American forces. Tehran called it a false pretext, as Tehran calls every Iranian military action that brings an American response. But the clock started no matter what Tehran called it. And what that clock started was a two-night and counting precision strike campaign that has now moved American precision weapons across the whole Iranian map in a way no earlier phase of this conflict had done. Night one was the opening statement. Air Force and Navy fighters delivered precision munitions into Iranian air defense batteries, ground control stations, and surveillance radar sites around the Strait of Hormuz and across the country. Explosions were heard across huge parts of Iran as the strike packages carried out their sequences. CENTCOM's description of the operation was careful and exact, a proportional response to recent attacks on U.S. forces and international commercial ships moving through regional waters. Proportional, targeted, methodical. Night one was the careful opening of a campaign that was always built to escalate. Iran's response to Night 1 followed the same script the IRGC has been using without change throughout this conflict. Claims of striking 18 American targets across Ali al-Smim and Ahmed al-Jab in Kuwait and Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain, drones sent into the 5th Fleet's anchorage in Bahrain, a long-range missile fired at Azra Air Base in Jordan, one of the most important bases in the American regional posture because it houses F-35s. The IRGC claimed it struck an F-35, either the aircraft itself or its hangar. Reports were uneven and unconfirmed, coming out of Iranian sources whose built-in reason is to claim success no matter what really happened. But the launches were real. The missiles were real. The institutional determination to respond with everything available was real. Here is the most important analytical point in the entire Iranian response picture. And it is the one that tells you more about where this conflict is going than any single strike or any single Iranian claim. The IRGC's ballistic missile stockpiles are down about 90% from pre-conflict levels. 90%. The institution that built its whole deterrent posture, its whole regional influence structure, its whole negotiating leverage around having thousands of ballistic missiles able to reach targets across the Middle East, is now operating with only a small part of that inventory, firing salvos of about 10 at a time, waiting several days between launches, rationing the last remains of a strategic weapons program that the American campaign has been steadily removing through every phase of this conflict. What you are watching when you see the IRGC launch 10 missiles at Bahrain and then wait 3 days before launching again is not tactical patience, it is inventory management on the edge of running out. An institution that once launched hundreds of missiles in one coordinated salvo, the kind of massive launch that can overwhelm even advanced air defense networks, is now carefully counting what it has left and deciding which targets are worth spending the remaining inventory on. That is not the behavior of a military force carrying out a confident strategic campaign. That is the behavior of a military force that knows its most important weapons are almost gone and cannot be replaced because the production infrastructure, the resupply routes, and the aerial import pathways are all being closed at the same time. Night 2 intensified. More strike packages, more Iranian air defense architecture being taken apart piece by piece, more IRGC command and control infrastructure going dark, and then the Secretary of Defense gave the statement that worked like a movie trailer for what was coming next. "We will be busy tonight." 3 words that told everyone who understood the operational context of this conflict everything they needed to know about the scale of what was being prepared for Night 3, the largest strike package yet, the one the American military had been building toward since the ceasefire ended and full war footing returned. Now let's talk about what 49 Tomahawk missiles really mean as an operational tool in this context, because the number matters for more than just its dramatic visual effect. A Tomahawk cruise missile is not a dumb bomb. It is a precision-guided, terrain-following, GPS-updated weapon system able to travel hundreds of miles at low altitude and deliver its warhead within meters of a chosen target coordinate. It can be reprogrammed in flight, it can move around obstacles, it can be aimed at specific parts of a larger structure. A communications tower on a specific building, a radar emitter on a specific installation, a fuel storage tank at a specific distance from civilian infrastructure, with the kind of accuracy that separates precision warfare from the blunt force bombardment of earlier eras of war. 49 of them fired from one destroyer in one night means 49 precision effects arriving at the same time across the full geographic depth of Iranian territory. Each one aimed at a specific part of the IRGC's military infrastructure, each one chosen because the targeting intelligence identified it as part of a capability the IRGC was using to threaten American forces, partner nations, or commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Tomahawks were not alone. The F-16 CJ Wild Weasel was in the air, the platform whose whole job is to suppress Iranian air defense systems by hunting their radar emitters with AGM-88 HARM missiles that follow the radar missions themselves. The moment an Iranian radar operator switches on his system to search for the incoming threat, he paints a target on his own forehead. The HARM follows the emission back to its source. That suppression layer was running at the same time as the Tomahawk salvos, making sure that whatever Iranian air defense capability might otherwise have engaged the incoming cruise missiles found itself under direct attack the moment it tried. Behind the Wild Weasels came the freight trains. The F-15E Strike Eagles, the platform able to carry the heaviest precision ordnance in the American tactical aviation inventory, including bunker-busting bombs designed specifically to hit targets buried underground, GBU-54s, 2,000-pound joint direct attack munitions, the works. The F-15E is the door kicker of the American air campaign, the platform that shows up after the suppression layer has cleared the air defense environment and drops the ordnance that destroys the hardened targets that survived the opening suppression sequence. And above all of it, F-35s tracked the Iranian response in real time, watching what the IRGC was doing as the strikes happened and feeding that intelligence picture into the targeting cells for the next sequence. F-18 Super Hornets launched off carrier decks in the Arabian Sea. The full multi-platform, multi-domain, layered precision strike architecture of the United States military, executing at the same time on a scale no regional enemy has faced in the modern era of precision warfare. Every platform doing the exact job it was built to do in the exact order that gives the highest overall effectiveness, coordinated across hundreds of miles of operational airspace with the E-3B Sentry overhead, sending the signals that kept every part of the package synchronized. Now let's address the most important sentence spoken in this entire conflict. The announcement that Kharg Island would be taken, placed under total American control along with other oil infrastructure points, managing Iran's oil and gas markets much like the United States has done with Venezuela. That sentence is not a military escalation in the normal sense. It is a declaration of a new strategic objective that changes the whole purpose of the American campaign and the whole economic structure of how this conflict could end. Every earlier strike in this campaign, no matter how devastating, no matter how broad its destruction of Iranian military infrastructure, has been framed in the operational language of maritime security enforcement, degrading Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, protecting innocent civilian mariners, keeping the international waterway open for global commerce. Those are the stated reasons. They are also accurate descriptions of what the military campaign has been doing. But taking Kharg Island and assuming control of Iranian oil and gas markets is a completely different kind of objective. It is not degradation, it is acquisition. It is the United States military establishing operational control over the economic infrastructure of a sovereign state, not to destroy it, but to own it, to direct its output, to decide where the money goes and who gets it, to take from the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps the $500 million per day that Kharg Island generates and redirect that money in ways Washington, not Tehran, decides. The comparison to Venezuela is analytically useful. The United States has established systems of oversight, sanctions enforcement, and revenue control over Venezuelan oil production that have fundamentally changed the economic relationship between the Venezuelan state and its main revenue source. The announcement about Kharg Island says the same framework will be applied to Iran, that the terminal handling 90% of Iranian crude exports will no longer be an asset of the Islamic Republic, generating revenue for the IRGC. It will be an asset under American operational control, generating revenue in directions the American administration decides. For the IRGC's leadership, that announcement is not a military threat, it is an existential threat to the institutional structure of the regime itself. Without Kharg Island's revenue, the IRGC cannot pay its personnel, cannot fund its proxy network from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq to Syria, cannot sustain its weapons programs, cannot maintain the patronage structure through which it has secured political loyalty inside the Islamic Republic's institutions for 4 decades, cannot do any of the things that make it the dominant power in the Iranian political system. The loss of Kharg Island's revenue is not a blow to the IRGC's military capability, it is a blow to the IRGC's ability to exist as a working institution. And here is what makes that announcement so strategically devastating in its psychological and diplomatic effect beyond the immediate military dimension. The IRGC has been operating throughout this conflict under the assumption that the American campaign would eventually stop, that diplomatic, economic, or political limits would force a pause, a negotiation, a ceasefire that would let the institution rebuild, rearm, and restart its campaign from a position partly rebuilt during the pause. The ceasefire showed that this assumption was not irrational. The ceasefire happened. You cannot wait out a campaign that has taken your money and is holding it permanently. The ceasefire and rebuild strategy requires that the basic economic structure of the regime stay intact enough to pay for the rebuilding. Kharg Island, under American control, removes that basic structure from the equation in a way no strike campaign, no matter how broad, can do by itself. Destroying weapons removes current inventory. Owning Kharg removes the financial system that buys the next inventory. Now let's go inside the Iranian strategic position and understand what the IRGC actually wants. Because understanding the real objective explains why negotiation has been impossible, and why the current path was always more likely than any managed diplomatic resolution. The IRGC is not fighting this war to control the Strait of Hormuz just for its own sake. The strait is leverage, the mechanism through which the institution creates bargaining power against a United States that has enough economic and political interest in Gulf energy security to be pushed into negotiations under certain conditions. The deeper objective is institutional survival through nuclear weapons capability. The IRGC's whole long-term strategic plan rests on a sequence. Use the strait as leverage to force an American withdrawal from the region. Use the diplomatic breathing room created by that withdrawal to complete the nuclear weapons development program. Emerge with a nuclear deterrent that makes direct military action against the Islamic Republic too costly for any outside actor, and then govern Iran indefinitely from behind the protection of that deterrent. That is why the demands the IRGC has made in every negotiation during this conflict are structurally unacceptable to any American administration: full war reparations, American withdrawal from the entire region, unrestricted right to develop a nuclear program. These are not negotiating positions acting as opening offers in a diplomatic process where both sides make concessions and end in a compromise. They are statements of the IRGC's real minimum conditions for a settlement that preserves its institutional position, and those minimum conditions are incompatible with any American strategic interest in the region, any Gulf Arab partner nation's security, any Israeli government's survival logic, and any international non-proliferation framework that has ever existed. The Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi, the President Pezeshkian, the diplomats who go to Doha meetings and sometimes deny they are there, even while their own president is announcing the meeting from the Oval Office, these are the westward-facing representatives of a regime whose real decision-making power sits with the IRGC. They cannot make a deal without IRGC approval, and the IRGC will not approve any deal that does not preserve its nuclear program, its regional proxy network, and its dominant position in the Islamic Republic's internal power structure. None of those conditions fit with the terms the American military campaign is forcing toward, so the negotiations have been theater, not cynically theater. The diplomats involved are honestly trying to find a framework both sides can accept. But structurally theater, because the institution that truly holds decision-making power in Tehran has goals that cannot be satisfied by any agreement the United States can sign while keeping its own strategic commitments in the region. The IRGC wants to win. Winning for the IRGC means preserving the regime in a form that can eventually get nuclear weapons. The United States has made clear through Trump's public statement that Iran will never have a nuke, that this is the one outcome it will not accept under any circumstances. These positions cannot be bridged with creative diplomatic language. They are structurally incompatible, and that structural incompatibility explains the American decision to move from degrading Iranian military capability to taking Iranian economic infrastructure. If the IRGC cannot be negotiated toward an acceptable outcome, the alternative is removing its ability to keep the conflict going. Not by destroying its weapons faster than it can replace them, but by eliminating the financial system that pays for the entire enterprise. Now let's talk about the tactical problem the American military has been solving through these back-to-back nights of strikes. Because the operational challenge of running precision strike campaigns against an enemy that spent the ceasefire burying everything underground is more complex than the headline strike numbers show. Iran's reconstitution strategy during the ceasefire was systematic and deliberate. The IRGC learned from the first phase of American strikes exactly which kinds of assets were most vulnerable to aerial attack: fixed installations, surface-deployed radar systems, coastal naval facilities, above-ground missile storage. It spent the ceasefire moving everything it could underground, burying missile stockpiles in hardened underground storage facilities, repositioning mobile launchers to underground shelters in the eastern mountain regions where the coast-focused first phase of strikes had not reached, hardening communications infrastructure, building new sites, including 2 that CENTCOM found and struck before their concrete had fully cured because American surveillance found them the moment they were completed. Everything that still has working military value in the IRGC's remaining inventory is underground. That changes the targeting problem in a specific and technically important way. Striking a surface-deployed radar site takes 1 precision munition with the right guidance package. Striking an underground hardened facility takes bunker-busting weapons, specifically the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator for the deepest targets, or the family of bunker-busting variants carried by F-15E Strike Eagles for more moderate hardening. The SE-Day layer still goes first to clear the air defense environment, but the follow-on strike package is configured differently. Heavier ordnance, more carefully sequenced to deal with underground target geometry, more dependent on the intelligence picture that Force Recon and ISR platforms have built of exactly where the underground facilities are and how they are laid out. This is the operational environment that Night 3's strike package was built for. Not the targets that were visible and easy to reach in the first phase, the targets the IRGC believed it had protected by putting them underground during the ceasefire. The American military spent the ceasefire doing the same thing the IRGC was doing, not rebuilding weapons, but building the intelligence picture of where the IRGC had moved everything so that when the campaign restarted, the targeting packages would be aimed at the new positions, not the old ones. CENTCOM found both newly built sites before their concrete cured. That is not simple surveillance. That is a persistent, comprehensive, real-time intelligence collection capability that sees Iranian military infrastructure being built as it is being built and adds it to the target list before it becomes operationally useful. The IRGC cannot build anything the American intelligence system does not find. It cannot hide things by burying them when the sensors tracking it can see what is happening underground through a mix of seismic monitoring, thermal signature analysis, electromagnetic emissions tracking, and human intelligence provided by ground-based operations that have been running throughout this conflict. Now let's talk about the oil tanker side of this story that has been running alongside the military campaign and gives an extra operational mechanism for the economic pressure track the American campaign is carrying out. The MT Gelivier took 2 Hellfire missiles to the engine room after the crew ignored repeated warnings from American naval forces enforcing the blockade. This is not the American military striking commercial shipping at random. It is the enforcement mechanism of the naval blockade working exactly the way naval blockades have always worked. Warnings are given, compliance is demanded, and if compliance is refused, the ship's ability to move is removed with precision munitions aimed specifically at the engine room to disable, not sink. 2 Hellfires to the engine room, the ship stops, the blockade is enforced, the message to every other vessel thinking about a run to Iranian ports is delivered in the clearest possible way. The combination of naval blockade enforcement, Kharg Island seizure, and the steady elimination of every other Iranian revenue mechanism creates a financial encirclement that is complete in a way military strikes alone cannot achieve. Strikes destroy capability. Financial encirclement destroys the institution's reason to keep fighting. Because if the money that pays for the fighting is gone, the institutional calculation about whether continued resistance can produce any result worth the cost becomes impossible to make in favor of continued resistance. Now let's analyze the 3-track convergence with the depth and detail this moment demands, because the separate tracks of the American campaign do not create their full effect by themselves. Their convergence at the same time is what creates the strategic condition the Iranian regime is now facing. The military track is at maximum operational intensity, 49 Tomahawks in one night. The full layered strike architecture of Wild Weasels, Strike Eagles, F-35s, and carrier-based F-18s operating at the same time, Night 3 being the largest package yet. Bunker-busting ordnance being used against underground facilities. The IRGC used the ceasefire to prepare. The Marine Expeditionary Unit positioned offshore with its ISR capability, its F-35Bs, its force recon operators, and its self-sustained 2-week combat capability, ready to carry out the Kharg Island ground operation. Iranian ballistic missile stockpiles at about 10% of pre-conflict levels, being rationed in salvos of 10 and launched with days between cycles as the institution manages the last remains of its strategic deterrent. The military track is not leveling off. It is accelerating with each new night of operations. The financial track is moved from pressure to possible elimination. $500 million per day flows through Kharg Island. If Kharg Island comes under American operational control, that flow stops going to the IRGC and goes somewhere else. The proxies in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq that depend on Iranian money face funding interruption. IRGC personnel who depend on institutional salary structures face payment disruption. Weapons programs that need procurement funding face budget collapse. The entire financial structure of the Islamic Republic's military and political dominance rests on the oil revenue Kharg Island generates. Taking Kharg is not hitting the IRGC's wallet. It is taking the wallet completely and putting it in an American pocket. The psychological track is working on several audiences at once with an intensity not seen before. The Iranian civilian population is living through rolling blackouts, economic encirclement, and growing evidence that the government that promised them security and dignity is carrying out a military campaign that is producing the opposite of both. The IRGC's own military personnel are fighting a campaign in which their ballistic missile inventory is 90% depleted, their air defense has been stripped to irrelevance against manned aircraft, their coastal military infrastructure has been systematically destroyed through months of operations, and their Supreme Commander's son is somewhere in the background of a regime that has publicly committed itself to goals it cannot achieve militarily. The Iranian political establishment, the clerics, the technocrats, the institutional actors the regime needs in order to function, is watching the IRGC's institutional position weaken with every strike package that arrives and every day that Kharg Island stays within operational range of a Marine Expeditionary Unit that does not need permission from anyone to take it. And internationally, the announcement about taking Kharg and controlling Iranian oil markets has added a new actor to the strategic calculation, Europe. The United Kingdom specifically has historically benefited from a premium on Brent crude futures pricing tied to the volume moving through the Gulf. If the United States assumes operational control of Iranian oil infrastructure, the pricing and distribution dynamics of Gulf energy shift in ways that give European energy consumers and European governments a direct stake in the result of the American campaign that earlier phases of the conflict did not create. European partners who have kept a steady distance from the American military campaign may find their own economic interests lining up more closely with American strategic objectives as the meaning of Kharg Island control moves through the global energy market structure. Here is the honest strategic assessment of where this conflict stands right now. The Islamic Republic of Iran is fighting a war it cannot win militarily, cannot sustain financially, and cannot negotiate its way out of because the institution that holds real decision-making power in Tehran, the IRGC, has goals that are incompatible with any outcome the United States can accept. Its ballistic missile stockpile is at 10% of pre-conflict levels. Its coastal military infrastructure has been reduced from a full maritime coercion architecture to a set of scattered, damaged remnants spread along a coastline that American aircraft operate over with total impunity. Its underground reconstituted assets are being found and targeted by an American intelligence capability that located newly built sites before their concrete cured. Its financial infrastructure is facing possible seizure of the terminal through which 90% of its crude export revenue flows. And its only remaining strategic option, the nuclear weapons development program it has protected at all costs, has been publicly declared by the American president as something that will never be allowed to happen. The IRGC's strategic theory of this conflict has been to hold out long enough to force a negotiated outcome that preserves the regime in a form able to eventually achieve nuclear weapons capability. That theory requires surviving the American military campaign long enough for political and economic pressure to force a pause. But with Kharg Island potentially going under American operational control, the financial system that funds the holdout strategy is being removed. You cannot wait out a military campaign if you cannot afford to pay the people carrying out your side of it. The Apache went down in the Strait of Hormuz. Both crew members survived because an autonomous sea drone got to them first. 49 Tomahawks flew through the night toward targets spread across the whole Iranian map. Night 3 was announced as the largest strike package yet. And somewhere on the USS Tripoli, Marines who do not ask permission from anyone are looking at the intelligence picture Force Recon has built of Kharg Island's defenses, knowing that the presidential announcement about taking it was not a conditional statement, it was a schedule. The mullahs had a chance to come to the table with something that looked like common sense. They could not do it because the institution that truly runs the Islamic Republic does not operate on common sense. It operates on ideology, on institutional survival, and on the belief that it can outlast whatever pressure is put on it. That belief has carried the IRGC through 47 years of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and limited military exchanges. It has never been tested against what is being applied to it right now. A simultaneous military, financial, and strategic dismantling that is getting close to the point where the institution being dismantled may no longer have the ability to rebuild from what is left when the current campaign reaches its end. The IRGC is in its last death throes. The ballistic missiles are almost gone, the coastal architecture is destroyed, the airports are being hit to shut down aerial resupply, the ports are blockaded, the rail corridor is cut, the power plants are being struck, and Kharg Island, the financial heart, the $500 million daily pulse of the regime's institutional existence, has been publicly announced as the next acquisition of the United States of America. The Iranian air traffic control system is telling its people to dismiss the Tomahawks as lightning strikes. The IRGC is claiming the Strait of Hormuz is closed while hundreds of vessels move through it. The deputy foreign minister is denying meetings that the American president is announcing from the Oval Office, and the USS Michael Murphy is reloading its vertical launch cells for whatever tonight brings. The entire Iranian air defense network, its navy, its radar systems, and most of its offensive capability are, in the words of the American commander-in-chief, gone. What remains is a regime firing its last ballistic missiles in rationed salvos of 10, burying what little it has left in underground facilities that American surveillance found the moment they were built, and preparing for the moment when it runs out of options that were already running out before tonight's strike package even begins. That moment is not coming. It is here, and the Marines on the Tripoli are not watching it from far away.